What's up everyone, and thank you for stopping by the channel. Today's project is this Echo trimmer, and the problem is that it runs, but sometimes it's hard to start and there's a small fuel leak. Let's take a good look at it, find out what's wrong with it, and hopefully we can fix it. In this video, we try and repair this trimmer. However, it may not be the exact repair that you need to make to yours. We'll explore other options later in the video. In a previous video, we fixed a common problem with this particular model, which was the trigger, so it's now usable. However, something we didn't discuss is that it's sometimes tough to start and it leaks a small amount of fuel. There's also a few parts that are beginning to wear out or just missing that we want to replace. That way we don't have to worry about it for the next season. Now, the first part that's worn out is the primer bulb. These are only a few dollars if you only order one, so it's better if you order several. However, most people only need one. Luckily, they're easy to change. The next part that's worn out is the fuel tank grommet. It's no longer sealing very well around the fuel lines, so it's beginning to leak around there. The best choice is to order the fuel lines and the grommet as a kit. One part that is missing is the air filter, which is very important for a small engine, otherwise you're going to damage it over time. I'll start by removing the old carburetor. After that, I'll order a new one. And the reason I do it this way is I want to compare the old one to the one for sale, and I want to make sure they look very similar. If you're really unsure which carburetor you need to buy, contact the seller and ask them if this is the right one you need for your particular model. If it's not the right one, they may have another listing that's the right one for you. If it's an option, try ordering a carburetor kit that has everything or most everything that you need, and you'll get a better deal that way. The first fuel line I'll be disconnecting is the return line, and of course the last line is the fuel filter line. After that, pry the fuel grommet out of the tank, and then we'll look at the parts that I'll be using for this project. While prying up the grommet, you can see just how soft it actually is. Here's the kit I ordered from Amazon, and the reason I picked this particular kit is that it has almost everything I need for this project. Now, you may not need this one, but it was a great value. Here's the air filter, which is definitely needed since this one was missing. Next is the fuel lines and the fuel tank grommet, and this grommet is just a bit bigger than I need. 2 extra primer bulbs, which is nice to have extra, and this looks like to be the correct size grommet, so I need to transfer the fuel lines to it. And finally, I have a bag containing the new carburetor along with some of the gaskets, which is great since the stock gaskets will be difficult to remove without breaking them. Before installing the new carburetor, it's a good idea to compare the new carb to the old carb just to make sure they're pretty much the same. If there are any problems, contact the seller with your questions. Here's a closer look at the old grommet, and you can see how very soft and sticky it's become. And since it's soft, it's not sealing against the fuel lines, which have softened up a bit as well, causing our fuel leak. Here's the grommet from the kit, so next I'll remove the fuel lines from the larger grommet and transfer them over. And don't worry, I have a use for this larger grommet. As some of you recall, I have a green machine trimmer from the 1980s, and this grommet is exactly what it needs. After replacing the fuel lines in the smaller grommet, we can now reinstall it back into the fuel tank. I'm going to tell you that's a lot easier said than done. Take your time, otherwise you might damage the fuel lines or the grommet. In real time, this took about a minute and a half. Make sure it's seated all the way around the grommet before we continue on to the next repair. Now, you don't have to use a flathead screwdriver to do this, but if you do, make sure it's very dull. Next, I'll replace the carburetor along with the 2 new gaskets. If you're unsure how the gaskets go, look at the old carburetor and it should give you an idea which one goes where. You can install the fuel lines now or later once it's installed. The fuel filter line goes on the port near the engine, and the return line is the one closer to the air filter. After installing the throttle cable, make sure it's working like it's supposed to. Once the carburetor is installed on the engine, reinstall the new air filter, its cover, and then prime the fuel system, and then hopefully we'll start the engine up. Now, I'm not going to replace the spark plug just yet. I'll do that later if there's a starting problem. Well, it starts pretty easily and it runs okay. Now, I could just leave it like that. It would probably last for years this way, but I want to make sure that this thing is tuned for my area. On the old carburetor, the H screw is located under this plastic cap near the primer bulb, and the L screw is also hidden under a metal cap on the top of the throttle assembly. But luckily, the new aftermarket carburetor has these screws uncapped, so you can easily make adjustments on them. Now it starts and idles fine, so I only want to check it when it's running at high RPMs. For that, I want to adjust the H screw near the primer bulb. Before I start the adjustments, I want to remove the top engine cover and look at the spark arrestor screen on the muffler. If this is clogged, then it will not allow the engine to get to full speed. As you can see, the screen is almost completely clear of any carbon, so now I can replace the screen and make my adjustments. If yours is clogged with carbon, try burning the carbon off with a torch or a strong flame. Another reason why you should replace your carburetor, then service it, it's just easier. For the investment in time and whatever parts you may need to replace, it's almost a guaranteed success over trying to overhaul an old carburetor. Of course, I will always try and clean it, and if it works, that's great news. But sometimes you have a hard time finding the correct diaphragms, but you can always find the whole carburetor easier than the individual parts. Now you're going to need to use one of these small flathead screwdrivers or something similar because these screw heads are absolutely tiny. First, I'll turn the screw clockwise and listen to how the engine reacts. Then I'll turn it counterclockwise until the engine is near its highest RPM, and then I'll turn it a little past that to make it run a little bit rich and keep the exhaust gas temperatures down and keep the engine from overheating. Well, I'm pretty satisfied with the way it's running. The only thing left to do is to let it cool down and try a cold start and make sure it starts fine and make any final adjustments then. So my question is, if you knew you had a carburetor problem that was keeping you from starting your equipment, would you send it in for service and let them decide what to do, or would you buy a replacement carburetor from Amazon? Now, most of the time you just have to remove 2 long bolts, disconnect 2 fuel lines and a throttle cable to replace a carburetor. Now, I think that's pretty easy, but are you willing to try it out yourself? Thank you for watching. I really appreciate your time here. Please feel free to ask any questions, and I hope to see you in my next video.